confirming. All right, thank you so much for the organizers. I know how much work has gone into the workshop, and you guys have done a really wonderful job. It was really great to also hear all the presentations from before this talk. I think they set up a lot of the things that we want to talk about very nicely. So what we're going to do here is this is joint work with Basiliyos, Betru, and Meareg, Hailemariam, who are both in the audience, so you can find us somewhere on Gather over the next 3 days to talk to us. This is an ongoing collaboration with the Ethiopian Ministry of Education. And today we're not really going to have any solutions for you. This was a problem pitch submission. We wanted to report on our ongoing conversations and collaborations with the ministry. And we just want to put some problems on your radar and start discussions, hopefully at this workshop, but also beyond that we think are important problems. So as you know, everyone here knows, these student to school assignment problems, school choice is often seen as a really big success story of mechanism design. This work started in the late 1990s and has really galvanized researchers across economics and computation and other more algorithmic spaces as well. And it's helped redesign assignment of students to schools in Turkey, which is where it started, but really across the world, including here in the US, in major cities like Boston and Chicago and DC and New York and many other large cities in the US. And despite the prevalence of school choice mechanisms, a lot of times these mechanisms have been less concerned about the kind of rich and complex diversity goals that might underlay many settings in education. So a lot of ministries of education or a lot of departments of education might be striving to ensure that our educational institutions are representative of the communities that we're serving, right? So they might be trying to make sure that we have gender balance or race or ethnic group balance, socioeconomic status, geography, and all these other things that we know really matter in ensuring a more inclusive educational space. So this picture that you see here is one taken in Boston, which is where I'm currently based. And it's, they call this a new generation of activists. So these are really the children that you see here that are demanding diversity in schools on the anniversary of the Brown versus Ford, which is seen as like, you know, the start of a lot of the school integration movements that we see in the US. But we know that Boston, like many other major cities in the US, is really struggling by having segregated schools. So if you look at this plot, the black dotted line is the national average. You see that between 1987 and now, actually, the percentage of Black students that go to mostly non-white public schools, which is one measure of segregation, has actually been going up. And it's actually the worst in the Northeast, right? Contrary to sort of maybe colloquially, we might believe that this is a South problem, but actually the most segregated schools are, or, you know, on average, the most segregated schools are in the Northeast than other parts of the country, right? So segregation is a huge issue. We really care about diversity and inclusion, and we would like to improve that. And how do we do that? And in some ways, a lot of what I want to talk to you about today was started with a conversation with Robbie Havadla, who was worked at Boston Public Schools and was attending the very first MD4SG workshop. And I remember Irene Lowe and I had a conversation with him where he said, he's like, you know, it's great that you have all these like theoretical guarantees for all these mechanisms, but you have no idea how difficult it makes my life, right? And he was kind of going through all these practical challenges that we don't necessarily pay attention to when we think about theoretical challenges in matching mechanisms. And I feel like in some ways that sort of really sat with me, and it's only recently that we've actually started to do something about it. So we started to ask questions around these diversity challenges, but also some other related problems, right? Like, you know, you might set diversity goals that may prove to be very theoretically constraining, but do they actually end up being challenging in practice, right? And if so, then how, in what ways are they challenging? And what challenges exist in formulating some goals that we have, like diversity goals. We think we know what we want, but actually, if you have to kind of write it down in math, then maybe that's going to be challenging. And if so, in what ways is it not adequately accounted for? We also really care about just mechanisms that have already been used and whether those yield disparate allocations by different demographics. For instance, if you were to take, deferred acceptance and just run it and then kind of look at the outcome in satisfaction between, say, male versus female students, do you end up seeing significant differences, right? So this is something we care about. And also, how do we build trust, right? Because trust seems to be very key here, and we wanted to kind of investigate different properties of mechanisms that we might leverage to allow investigation of these mechanisms, but also build trust of these matching mechanisms. So we're doing this in the context of Ethiopia, where all three of us are from. And we have been exploring these challenges in this ongoing collaboration that I mentioned to you. We're looking at the assignment of students to universities. Here, we're just going to very quickly condense numerous conversations that we've had with the ministry. And this was actually primarily done by Basiliyos, who's been a really wonderful lead for this project and has been talking to many folks within the ministry. And here we'll just outline some of the theoretical and empirical challenges that we see here. So the data that we have access to through the Ministry of Education, it involves, so every year, so this is from 2018, but every year we have about 300,000 students that take these placement exams. They're high school seniors, and they come from over 1,500 high schools in the country from 11 different regions. And they want to be assigned to one of 43 universities. And these students are in four different tracks: natural science, social science, and then the teaching variants for both of these. And there's also accommodation considerations like mothers and students with disabilities and twins get sort of special accommodation considerations. We won't get into it, but it's actually worth discussing. So find us on Gather if you'd like to talk about it. So these students take these exams, and what happens is the ministry, this is like a real life scan of a document from the ministry. The ministry sets different cutoff points for different different genders. So this is in Amharic, so many of you might not be able to read it, but the third column there is for male and the fourth column is for female. So you see like 176 versus 166 in the first row. And then the different, so the left-hand side is for natural sciences and the right-hand side is for social sciences. And the rows that you see here are for sort of different geographic regions and other considerations where we may want to set different cutoff points, right? So the ministry sets these cutoff points, and the goal is to make sure that we don't admit many more students than we have the capacity to assign to these universities. So here, I'm going to kind of quickly go through all of this, but here you see on the left-hand side students who took the entrance exams, and then on the right-hand side is students who passed the entrance exams. So the different colors correspond to different regions. We have 11 regions. The first bar is female and the second bar is male. So we have a lot more female students sitting to take the exams and also passing the exams than a lot fewer of them passing the exams and taking the exams than male students. So we have some discrepancy here worth keeping in mind. And then once they pass, what the students have to do is they sit down and they list their original preferences over each of the 43 universities. So you just see here one screenshot. This student preferred Meareg University as being their first choice, and then Adama Science and Technology University as being their second choice, and so on. And they express their full set of preferences. And there's a huge variance in students' preferences. So this is showing you a histogram of the different institutions and how many students express that as being their first choice. So you see here ID 43 and ID 1 are very popular among the students, and then the rest of them, there's a sort of a wide distribution. And the really huge question that the ministry emphasized with us is making sure that we sort of have like these, that we take into account these rich and complex diversity goals, making sure that we don't have too many students from the same high school in the same university, or from the same region, the same university, or different genders, and so on. And there are many challenges here that we won't be able to get into, but one that I really want to emphasize here is region specific. So the ministry initially said, we want to make sure that no more than 10% of students stay in the region that they're from, right? So if you're from, say, the Oromia region, they want to make sure that only 10% of those students end up staying in that region for their university. But we have a challenge here, right, which is that if you look at the number of students who passed these exams by these regions, you see that there's a sort of significant variance. And if you look at the fourth one, which is the Addis Ababa region, you see that there's over 10,000 students who've passed the exam. But Addis Ababa only has 2 universities, right? So it doesn't have a massive capacity, only 2 universities, but you have over 10,000 students who've passed. And so if you stick with this 10% constraint, then you would end up having, over half of the capacity of those universities would be taken up by students from that region. And so that would be kind of in violation. So in many conversations with the ministry, they sort of relaxed this constraint to be in the range of 6% in the case of Addis Ababa to 20% in the Amhara and Oromo regions where they had the opposite problem. And there's many other sort of diversity challenges here that I want to talk to you about. We won't have enough time, but in some ways, actually, a lot of the things listed for us were mutually exclusive, and so going through those has been a real a challenge, and actually a really exciting challenge. And I'll just close here by saying the current research and policy directions that we're exploring. We're looking at these kind of the trade-off between these practical and theoretical thinking, and how do we integrate insights from one to the other? How do we actually incorporate diversity goals in a way that's self-consistent and flexible and achieves the actual goals? And a huge one that I'd love to talk to folks about also is explainability and mechanism design, because the ministry has really emphasized that as being one way of building trust and minimizing kind of dissatisfaction with the system. So I'll close here. A lot of open questions. We'd really love to talk to you. There's a lot of really interesting questions that you could ask also that you can talk to my collaborators about as well. And with that, I'll close.